dear participants, we are going to start our panel discussion. For this panel discussion, I would like to invite and introduce some of our experts. Please take your seats. First of all, I would like to invite to our panels, and I will introduce online experts as well. Panel discussion. Okay. So, two of our experts are from our main hall. First of all, Professor Ravinder Gargesh. He is the president of Asia TEFL and professor of Samarkand State University with 40 years teaching experience as a teacher and as a researcher, teacher trainer, worked in more than yeah. Yes. And the second expert also from and the second is Greg Sateropoulos, the expert who made a very interesting and exciting presentation about public speaking, works with publication. He also teacher with 26-year experience. And also, some of our experts who are joining us online. First of all, John Alessi from UK. It's the managing director of the liveenglish.co.uk. John, can you turn your camera so we can see you? Just to check the voice.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good.
Speaker while we are talking. Also, Professor Penny Earl, the author of the Penny Earl's 100 Teaching Tips and many other course books and published by Cambridge University Press. Professor is now based in Israel. Professor, can we check the voice?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear. Thanks a lot. Also, we have Victoria Clark from British Council Global team, who works with the Global Assessment team. Victoria, can we please check voice quickly?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. And also Mukaddas Ogay from a language promotion agency, the agency established to set policy in language learning and standards. Mukaddas Ogay, can you check the voice?
I hope you can hear me now.
So thank you. Okay. And we will be sharing some questions for panel discussions, and for all experts, we'll give you 2 minutes to explain their point of view and then make comments about other opinions. Okay, while we are having some technical issues because we can't simultaneously put questions and speakers in one screen, let me read out questions. So, first of all, it's about challenges. What reforms are needed to promote language learning in suburban areas? Because the primary function of LPA and the now governmental policy should not be limited with learning and teaching in city centers where the educational infrastructure is already in place, but also in suburban areas. So what reforms are needed to promote language learning and teaching in suburban areas and train teachers in those areas? So what do you think? Professor Penny Earl, let's start with you.
I'm going to pass on this one because I'm not familiar with the environment you're talking about. And I think it'd be better if it was answered by people who are familiar with the setup. So I'll pass on to the next panel member.
Okay, Victoria, what about you? I know that you've been to Uzbekistan many times, so you can share your experience on this.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm not too familiar with the rural suburban areas of Uzbekistan, but I'm assuming that obviously good preset education is necessary, as well as continuous professional development for teachers in service. but also one of the main reform areas that we promote at the British Council is that the professionalisation of the ELT community. So in other words, the status of the English teacher to be raised and to be respected, first of all, so we get the best of the people coming into the profession, as we know we have, and they are respected and rewarded for being such, and offered continuous training throughout their careers and opportunities to specialise and professionalise more as they keep going. I think that's very important. And these opportunities, we must take into consideration perhaps technology. A lot of CPD or webinars and training, so trainings are often within the city areas, using technology to bring self-access courses or blended courses to teachers so they can, in their own time, at a reasonable cost, educate themselves better in the profession as they go through their professional career. I think that's very important, to take advantage of new technology to reach out to those teachers in the non-city areas. In fact, we're looking at, for example, putting assessment literacy courses as self-access courses for teachers to access at their own time. And I think that's really important. I'm not hearing anything. I don't know if there's technical issues.
So I totally agree with Victoria. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, how are you?
And yes, if to speak about the distant learning, it's a good decision for such the problem. And I'd just like to mention our mobile courses, mobile groups. We organized them last year, and our trainers, they went to the rural areas and they had their trainings there, especially for those teachers who don't have any access to the internet, and or they can't attend the sessions at the trainings, which are, as Muhammad said, it's true, many of them, they are organized in the big cities, and sometimes it's problematic for our teachers from the long distance schools. That's why I can say that mobile groups and distant learning, it can be a good decision for this problem, good solution to this problem.
Thank you. So while we tend to make our conference very formal, but our discussion for panel is very informal. So if any experts want to say something, you're more than welcome to put your hands up and make your comments about this. If there are any comments from other experts from our main hall or online.
I can add a couple of points. I think the question to a certain extent goes beyond the realm of teaching itself, because we're talking about also availability of infrastructure, and therefore it's probably an interdepartmental discussion that needs to be had within the country. Uzbekistan is just an example, but there are many other countries where, for instance, access to reliable Wi-Fi internet provision might be limited. And naturally, that's probably the first step into making sure that if it's great that there is a sort of a solution of a mobile team, but you could also argue that in countries that are incredibly vast, either you have a large number of mobile teams that are able to cater continually to teaching demands and requests across all regions. Otherwise, there will always be some limitations. I think it's a good step, but obviously the discussion probably needs to be had at almost at government level as to how do we get internet in those regions, and that is really probably the first fundamental step in sort of long-term sustainable, reliable and solid solution, really.
Thank you. Yes, sure. Professor, please.
From my Uzbek experience, Because when the COVID broke, I was here. And even I did not know how to handle the online teaching, neither the students. So suddenly we were asked to go online. We began with Telegram. It didn't work well. We took to Zoom. But as has been pointed out, the infrastructure everywhere in Uzbekistan is not the same. So it was impossible for me to contact students in the countryside, in the villages. They didn't have the infrastructure. So it was very, very difficult, very difficult. Then we tried Moodle, then we tried some other things, but very few students gained from it because of the lack of infrastructure. Once the infrastructure is good, yes, online learning has come to stay, no doubt about it. We need it. We need it not only as a supplement, not only as a hybrid, but sometimes even more extensively, We have very fine interactive platforms now. They can be utilized, but then the infrastructure is necessary. Yes, the will is here to learn in Uzbekistan, surely, but the infrastructure was in the countryside was missing.
And I'll just piggyback on that. That this goes way beyond just teachers themselves. It's the Ministry of Education with the other ministries to work together collaboratively to fix this. You know, I mean, here I came from Greece just for a few days, and I can't even speak to my children. Telegram gets cut off. So imagine day to day having to, you know, really nurture the minds of these children.
Thank you. So now let's go to the second question. In fact, the second question is more actual among all teachers of Uzbekistan. Questions is about international certificates, because now legally almost in every step of your education, whether this is for bachelor's degree, for master's degree, for university entrance, one of the important requirements is a language proficiency certificates like IELTS, Cambridge English Exams, Lingual Skill, or TOEFL. But the question we would like to bring is, are teaching qualifications like CELTA, TKT, TESOL more important than language proficiency for teachers? Because in an ideal world, we ask all teachers to have both. But in reality, what should be priority for teachers? Teaching qualifications, as I mentioned, something like CELTA or TESOL courses, or language proficiency, what they should focus first. So, who would like to start?
I don't mind starting this one. I think the language proficiency has to come first. If a teacher doesn't know the language, they can't teach it. You have to have knowledge of the basic subject matter you're teaching. But a very close second comes the training, and not necessarily TKT or CELTA Delta. It could be local university or college or seminar-based courses in various countries, which I know about, which are run internally by the country itself and are as good as far as I can tell, the international ones like CELTA and Delta. But the priority has to be proficiency in the language, and then the ability to teach. I have to just add a postscript here that proficiency in the language is not enough on its own. We've all seen native speakers trying to teach English in other countries when they have no idea at all about effective teaching methodology, which is a disaster. So bottom line, yes, you need both.
Can I add?
Thanks a lot.
Sorry, I agree, but
Please go ahead.
it's quite a controversial subject, because I think we need to define what we understand by proficiency. And also, I think we also need to look at the reality around the world. Most teachers around the world are not, in certain areas around the world, may not be of an advanced proficiency as we understand that. And in fact, I've worked in areas around the world where teachers are at best A2 in English, and they do perform the job. Now, of course, the teaching methodology is absolutely essential. There is no way we can teach with just language, absolutely. As a professor mentioned, there are many native speakers who don't teach well. That's clear. It is not it's not sufficient, rather, it's necessary, but not sufficient. I think we have to be realistic. I think a teacher at B1 who enters the profession is able, with good methodology training and obviously experience, etc., mentoring, should be able to teach certainly A1, A2, and very low B1 up to, which is predominantly high school. Ideally, we'd like them to be above a B2, ideally, but I think in reality, we have to learn how we train teachers of, shall we say, intermediate proficiency to teach better. And help them along their language learning journey so they don't stop learning language when they exit teacher college or enter the profession. But in fact, that's the beginning of a very long journey for them to get to a better proficiency. So it's a very controversial question. It's an interesting question.
Other comments, dear colleagues?
May I add one point? And I think it just highlights what Victoria just said. I remember, unfortunately, quite a few years ago now, my CELTA training here in London, and I just remember a bunch of 14 what you would probably call native speakers who in 4 weeks just about learned to stand in front of a group of people and not completely embarrass themselves, and therefore so have a basic understanding of classroom management, a basic understanding of lesson planning and lesson procedures, and of course the advantage of being native speakers. It might have been a slight advantage, but the reality was that we were probably quite totally inept in our first few weeks of actual teaching. And so yeah, I can only confirm that it takes weeks, years, and probably decades to hone those skills and become more confident, teachers. So I agree. You can't expect a student that of perceived or confirmed through a variety of tests, A2 level, let's say, to be able to teach a group of C1 level students, for sure. So my opinion would be that, language proficiency is important, but a continual professional development is fundamental, whether you're a completely fluent speaker or not.
So here I would like to give turn to Greg, please.
And through their training, I mean, okay, the hard skills is important, for them to pass the test, that they have the knowledge of English. But then it goes well beyond that now in education. As we see, children of today are experiencing so many different things than what we've experienced when we were kids. So the teachers need to be taught social emotional wellness, psychology of a child, empathy, all these people skills, soft skills, so that they can connect in a more effective manner with the child. So it's, yes, English, knowing, English at a B1 level, I agree with all of you, with everything you said. But I think that the relationship that you have with the child, as we said before, dear teachers who are with us today, and the teachers who will be listening to us through this video, you need to connect with your student and really form a good relationship with them, right? And once you do that, and you continue to build on that throughout the year, along with teaching them English and improving and making those mistakes, right? And trying the best that they can through performance and growth, I think then that's a well-rounded training structure.
Yes, language proficiency is the most important. Of course, it would be ideal if there's language proficiency as well as a good degree, CELTA or any other certification that you are good in the methodology. But without proficiency, it doesn't work. Again, I come back to personal experience with my teachers in the university in Samarkand. There are teachers with some degrees. I need not name them. But I find that their teaching methods are very deficient. Their knowledge is also deficient about how to teach. Not only in methodology, but also in assessment, also in how you make your lesson plan. They have no idea how a curriculum is made. They do not know how to set up a syllabus. So the whole lot of things that one does in training, and therefore courses like CELTA and other important courses, they're very important. But definitely before taking up any course or before giving significance to any course, a person must be well proficient in the language. Without proficiency, things don't work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from our colleagues? Okay, now let's move to the next question. As I told earlier in the beginning of this discussion, there a new agency established under the Cabinet of Ministry with the State of Ministry, the agency to promote foreign language learning, to promote them in every level, whether it's for pre-primary, primary, secondary, or even after secondary during employment. What are top suggestions you would like to give to the agency? Because now we have agency representatives, and I hope and believe that the authorities of this agency will also watch this video later. So what would be your top suggestions for this agency? Because they are now in charge of setting policies for our country. What would be suggestions you would give? For this question, I will be grateful if everyone answers and says their opinion within 2 minutes. So who would like to start? Colleagues?
I'll start if that's okay. I'll take it from my own area, which is assessment. For me personally, I think if my piece of advice from my own area, obviously of expertise, is that there is always a focus on 4 skills assessment in order for us to make sure that we do actually assess and hopefully the washback and teach and for the learning, the productive skills as well as the receptive skills. That hopefully will have a washback on the teacher training to offer teachers assistance and support in the teaching and assessment of speaking and writing. It will offer the learners hopefully also their support, again using perhaps technology to help students to in peers with their peers, practice speaking, etc. It's absolutely essential that we move away from the 2-skill, we call it the 2-skill cancer, that people exit schools or exit universities with an assessment that's only on the reading and listening, and we forget the very important skills of communication, which are essential for employability and for obviously academia and social life. So that would be my focus. My recommendation is to always look towards 4-skill communicative tests that will have positive washback on the teaching and learning.
So who wants to be second?
I don't mind. I can come in.
Please go ahead.
I come from slightly different angle perhaps. So I would probably recommend. I mean, the long term. You want to be able to develop a team or a number of teams or groups of people within the country that have that expertise, that are able to disseminate that knowledge and sort of build a strong teacher training unit really within Uzbekistan. Obviously, as I go back to my first point, the provision of technology and is important. So the ability to have reliable internet across the country is probably one of the first things you need to look at. But then that's building capacity, building skills and knowledge within the country. In the short term, probably events such as the ones we organized today, but ongoing collaboration maybe with experts from the outside to help you in that first phase of setting up your own internal domestic let's call it capacity, might be a good solution on different fronts, whether it's, you know, teacher training, you know, train the trainer sort of programs, sharing expertise with teachers. You know, you can name, there's quite a lot of things that can be done, you know, development of curriculum or school syllabi, and again, it goes back to what Victoria said, you know, integrating skills, go beyond what might be a top-down type of teaching, which you very often come across in certain regions and in more traditional school settings. So all of these things could be useful things to consider.
Would like to be the next?
I'm happy to come in here. I'm going to introduce a little level of disagreement, which should make things a bit interesting. Assuming that the agency has a sum of money to invest in English teaching, where should that money be invested? We've heard suggestions, technology and infrastructure, computers and internet, teacher training, tests which reflect the needs of good proficiency, communicative proficiency in English. I would suggest that if I had a sum of money to invest in English teaching in my own country, in any country, I would invest it first and foremost in increasing the number of hours teaching in schools, and trying to get smaller classes. And this is expensive, it does take a lot of money, but that's where I think the money needs to be firstly invested in providing the hours teaching for the children and adolescents in schools who can thereby increase their English. If they're only getting 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week, that's not enough. And the thing I said I would disagree with, I don't think the money should be invested in computers and in infrastructure. I don't think that this is a top priority. It is important, don't deny that. I don't think it is as important as providing the hours and providing what you already mentioned, the teacher training. I just want to perhaps overlap my 2 minutes just a little bit to show you a book, which I don't know if you've seen this. Don't know if it's being focused on. Sorry, it's coming out blurred.
Due to the blur, we can't see.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll tell you what it says. It says, Students, Computers and Learning, Making the Connection. It's an OECD publication where they looked at the amount of computerization in schools and the scores of students on learning tests. And funnily enough, they actually found a negative correlation. Those countries which had huge investments in computers and technology actually scored lower than the ones who had a medium investment. So what you need is a medium investment. You do need some, obviously, infrastructure and computers, but that is not what decides learning outcomes. It doesn't have it isn't the deciding factor in creating successful learning. What is the deciding factor is the number of hours that the children get in instruction and the level of the teachers. And we come back to this point, which has already been made, about teacher training, both pre-service and in-service. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments? Let's move to our face-to-face participants. Yeah?
First, I agree with what you said about the class. I wholeheartedly agree 100% with what you said about the amount of hours and the class size. And I agree with you, because if you, no, I know, but I was looking at her over there, so I wanted to be more personal. So, and it's so true, because the impact that a teacher has on a smaller class size, the amount of teachable moments that you can have with a smaller class size and more hours, that would definitely be on the top of their list to consider. And something else that they should do, the agency, is they should send out a form or some type of evaluation feedback from the teachers themselves. Get direct feedback from the teachers. Really read through them and really take that into consideration. It will take time. It will take some organization. But I think that is really, really important to hear it from the teachers themselves.
Well, my reaction is more down to earth. Look at Uzbekistan. English is so popular today. It was never before. Look at the numbers who are interested in learning English. What has been said so far probably holds good for advanced societies, where teaching programs are good, classrooms have limited number of students, some immigrants, that's fine. But here the numbers are huge and the teachers almost negligible. So what hours are we talking about? And which teacher will assess? It doesn't work like this, not here. What is needed in Uzbekistan is, my suggestion would be as follows. Yes, organizations must come in, foreign agencies must come in, they must train the teachers. There should be intensive training of teachers, maybe 100, maybe 200, intensive. And then let those teachers go out into Uzbekistan. Let there be a cascading effect. Let them teach more teachers and let them teach more teachers. That's the way to reach initially. Initially, it will have to be begun like this. Hours can be taken care of, but if there is no quality, if there is no input, no proper good teachers, what are we talking about? What hours are we talking about? So I think the more necessary for Uzbekistan is training of teachers and training more and more and more teachers so that they become responsible to the society, to the students, and they do justice to their classes. Once the teachers are in place, yes, we need more hours. Yes. Thank you.
If I may add, I think,
Any comments?
yeah, if I can make a small comment on that. Yeah, I mean, we can all agree. I think the assumption, obviously, based on the increase of, it's technically a given. Obviously, we're not 100%. Most of us from outside Uzbekistan, we're not 100% familiar with the reality on the ground in Uzbekistan. So obviously, the assumption is that you have good teachers, increase the number of hours, but obviously, if there's a problem before that, so we don't have maybe the volume of teachers, and those we have in place are not of the standard that we think would be required. Quantity and quality probably need to go hand in hand, and therefore, it is understood that teacher training programs probably, in whichever form, need to be the first step, and then move on to obviously increasing volume, quality, quantity, etc.
Thank you. Any further comments?
I'd just like to add one more comment about teacher. Oh, sorry, Muqaddas, do you want to speak? Shall I stop and let Muqaddas go first? Okay, I'll carry on. I just wanted to say that one big problem, and I imagine it's true, although I'm not familiar with Uzbekistan, but I imagine it's true here, a problem is the salaries of teachers. Until you have a reasonable incentive in terms of salaries of teachers, you're not going to get people volunteering to be English teachers, even if they know English. If they know English well, they're more likely to go into high tech rather than teaching. And you need to provide the relevant rewards in order to induce people to go in for teaching in Uzbekistan, in many other countries as well. So I think this would be an extremely important place to invest.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Yes, just on behalf of the head of our agency, I'd like to thank all of our colleagues, especially for their suggestions, and plus the last one about how to raise the salary of our teachers. All the targets of our agency were mentioned now. professional development, teacher or trainer trainings, the number of pupils in classes, the number of teachers at schools. It means that we have the right targets, and we are at the right direction. And thank you very much for your suggestions, very useful. And as to speak about computer-assisted language learning, again, it's another our target to to bring more technology in classes. Thanks a lot for your suggestions.
Thank you. And now let's turn to the final question about the role of private sector. It isn't big secret in Uzbekistan that the many language learning now happens in private sector. Many students and many teachers themselves have to go to the private centers and the private tutoring to improve their language proficiency. And the role of private sector, we all know the role of private sector here. What do you think should be the role of private sector, and what do you think should be the role of government in to what extent they should cooperate with each other? Can you make very comments about these topics? Who'd like to start?
I'm happy to start, get the ball rolling on that. Obviously, I come from the private sector, so in my opinion, should have a very, very strong role in it. No, I mean, it really depends. It's almost an ideological question here as to what's the role of the state versus the role of the private sector, and every country might have a slightly different approach to doing things. But to be pragmatic and practical, I mean, it's fairly logical, you know, if the government has, you know, the budget and the capacity to bring in expertise from the private sector, it just makes sense, you know. It is also true that in many contexts, some of the best experts work in the private sector. The private sector, generally speaking, might be able to pay more, and therefore it makes sense for experts to, you know, to be rewarded in that respect. But yeah, it's for me, it's a given. Experts, the two things need to go hand in hand. There need to be mechanisms, obviously, to make sure that the partnerships are, you know, checked, controlled. There shouldn't be, you know, opportunities for people just to take advantage of availability of budgets, and that, we know, not only in education, definitely that can happen. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's a logical next step, particularly looking at the situation that you're describing in Uzbekistan, where maybe one of the first priorities is teacher training. Then it makes sense to me that with that private enterprise is brought in to help deal with that first issue.
Can I go next? I agree. There is certainly a role for the private sector. There's no doubt about it. The private sector can add massive benefits to language learning, but I think we do need to keep a check. There are some countries, I've lived in, for example, Egypt for many years, 15 years. I lived in China for 7 years. And in these cultures and countries, the private sector has in fact replaced the public education system for English, where students only go and learn English in the private sector because the public sector is unable to handle the English language requirements that the students need. And that, of course, then causes inequity. Only those who can afford the private sector then become educated in English. So yes, I agree, absolutely, there's a role for the private sector. It can certainly add expertise. It can support the public sector. There's no two ways about it. But I think it does need to be in check. If it grows out of control, where then it replaces the public sector's language teaching. That's all I think that needs to be the concern there. That's the only one for me.
Any comments? Maybe from your side, Professor?
I come from a country where the private sector is very, very small. and I would say 90% of the students or more, 95%, study English and get their matriculation requirements for university in the public sector. And I totally agree with Victoria that I know a lot of countries, like the ones she mentioned also, I think Greece is in a similar situation, where the private sector is the one where most English, most if not all, English instruction is provided, and only those who can afford it go there, which, as Victoria says, leads to inequity. And I don't really know enough about it to suggest what can be done to contain this or make sure that the public sector, the state schools, get the necessary funding and teacher expertise to provide reasonable English instruction.
Yes, the public sector is very important because students come for their basic degrees. And once they come to obtain their degrees, they would like to have language competencies improved too, any foreign language. So the universities have their own place and the departments have their own place. But the private sector does have a place. If any student wishes to learn a bit more quickly, then they go to the private sector. Or somebody has a particular job in mind, some particular job that requires acquisition of skill very quickly, then surely private sector is the place. The person can go and take a training for 2 to 3 months and apply for a job and take the job. So for jobs, yes, the private sector has a place, definitely. And for the degrees, the universities have a place. But there is also a bridge, the private and public cooperation. So there should be, I think in Uzbekistan, they have begun the public and private cooperation. If private institutes collaborate with universities, create a kind of a program which doesn't belong to the university, which doesn't exactly belong to the private sector, somewhere in between, then probably the skills of both the university and the private sector can be brought together, and the result would be good. And also it would be economical for the students because the universities charge far less. Private sector charges more. So probably private-public enterprise joint collaboration is the thing that we are looking for, and it holds great promise.
I hope that happens. But as you said, in Greece, you know, they call it the frodestyrio, the private schools that the students go to. It's business, and you know, when it comes to business, it's all about sustaining a business and making money. So I really hope that what you said works, will work at some point in the future. But seeing what happens in Greece and some other countries, you know, the private sector, I think, would not want to lose from the chance of making, you know, doing better in their businesses, unfortunately. But it is something that is sad because my children also go to school and they aren't being taught enough regarding the English language. And so I help them at the house. And that makes me wonder, and what's happening now here is, why can't in the public sector, the level of education, the amount of time, the amount of resources be given to all students so that they don't have to go to the private sector? And those who can't afford it, is it fair? Food for thought.
May I add one little point, if that's okay? I think, from what I understand, Uzbekistan is, in a sense, in an enviable position because you're almost at the start of a process here, and that's, I understand, that's why the agency has been created, and therefore you are in that enviable position to see what has happened in other realities and take proactive steps to make things work in the right way. So, for instance, if we're talking about a private-public partnership, I think it's an ideal situation where you can actually choose to work with the private sector on very specific projects, for instance, or in certain particular areas that benefit what the public sector will then continue to deliver further down the line. So I think, you know, I wouldn't dismiss the private sector as a, you know, a greedy sort of a just make money enterprise. I mean, luckily we're all in education, and therefore we're probably, generally speaking, relatively nice people. So I think there are opportunities there with, as Victoria said earlier, and you know, careful consideration of how these partnerships are built, having checks in place. But I think it's probably essential to bring in that expertise to then be able to develop it on the ground, and then you carry on managing it in the long term, I think.
Any further comments? Any further comments? So we would like to thank all participants, but before we leave, I would like to make one screenshot of our experts. We made a screenshot of participants. Can you please keep your camera on and smile if possible, so we can have one screenshot together? Thank you a lot. So we would like to end our panel discussion, and now we'll award our participants. Thanks a lot, dear experts, for joining our panel discussion. This video is recorded, and I will make sure that the authorities, the LPA new agency, will certainly be informed about suggestions. Also, we have representative of LPA, Ms. Mukaddas Ogay, who will also inform the authorities, the Ministry of Public Education, Ministry of Higher Education. They work very closely with them about all the suggestions. What you say will certainly be important and certainly will be addressed. Mukaddas Ogay, do you have anything to add?
Not to ask, just to thank again for the conference and for the speeches. The presentations were very great, and I think they are very helpful for our teachers. Thank you very much for your time, for joining our conference. And again, thanks a lot to Muhammad and his team for organizing such good conferences all the time. It's just the real help and support for our teachers. Thanks a lot to everyone who took participation at this conference. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.